I never expected that my first ever video on YouTube would be about war. But then again, I never expected that I would ever have to talk or even think about war in the first place, that it would be so difficult and painful, or that I would have to film it thousands of miles away from what I used to call home. However, a little more than a year ago, everything I thought I knew fell apart. My name is Dinara, and I am from Russia. And last year, on the 24th of February, my country started a war. A tragedy that will haunt us for generations to come. A tragedy so awful, it seems unreal. And I still don't understand how can any of this be real. Back in December 2021, when I read all these articles that said Russia was gathering troops near the Ukrainian border, when I heard about the intelligence reports released by the US that claimed Russia was going to invade, I kept rolling my eyes. I thought it was impossible. Just the idea of it sounded crazy. Imagine someone telling you that your country is going to invade its neighbor. Like, why? What for? We live in the 21st century. Aren't we all past wars and geopolitics games? And what did Russia have to gain from invading Ukraine? More land? Like we didn't have enough or something. It sounded insane, and it still does. What I felt in the years coming up before the war in the people around me was tension and despair. More and more cracks appeared in Russia's fake democracy facade. More people protested. Videos about the corruption of government officials going viral. And it felt like the bubble of discontent was just about to burst. Only an idiot would start a war when people are already so riled up. I thought that the government could not afford to make the situation worse. War is horrible. Лишь бы не было войны. Anything but war. That's what we've been told our whole lives by our grandparents and teachers at school and everyone around us. I have been taught that nothing can justify a war. And Ukraine is our neighbor. It's more than a neighbor. We have shared past. Millions of Russians have family or friends there. No, the people in Russia won't sit still if we attack Ukraine. But here we are. The war has been going on for more than a year. And the angry mob of peace protesters still hasn't overthrown the government. Nothing like I imagined in my delusional dreams of revolution. Something horrible is going on. Hundreds, thousands of individual tragedies are being set in motion every single day. People lose their homes, everything they worked for, they lose their lives. Some manage to flee to a place where they have no home. Others have to hide in basements with no electricity, no heating, and sometimes no food. Just the horror of it. Bodies and torn limbs on the streets. Homes being taken away. Family pictures burnt away and lost forever. Pets being killed or abandoned. Children losing parents. So many women raped. So many loved ones lost. And it's all done in my name. I'm a citizen of Russia. I was born in Moscow and I had lived there for 28 years until I left the country back in October. All of this is done in my name. And it seems like nothing that I do has any effect to stop it. The thing I thought was impossible has happened, and it's still happening. And I feel like I was wrong about everything. But what exactly was I so wrong about? Was I wrong when I thought that people in Russia would be against a war? Do Russians want this war to begin with? And well, that's a difficult question because everyone seems to have different opinions about it. Some say that the majority supports the war. Others say it's the other way around. And the sociological data that we have is very unreliable. You may have heard about opinion polls conducted by the independent Levada Center that say that the war has approval ratings of more than 70%. Social scientists, however, question whether we can trust those polls or any polls at all, because 94% of Russians refuse to participate in surveys conducted by sociologists, likely because they are afraid of being persecuted for their answers, since they suspect that the pollsters are associated with the government. So the truth is, we don't know, and we can't know how many people actually support the war. But I can't deny my own experience. And my experience is, almost everyone I know is against the war. All the people I know, my friends, my family, for all of us, this war is a tragedy. Not only because of the lives lost, but because the country we thought we lived in has ceased to exist. It turned out to be something completely different. Those first few weeks were devastating. Everyone walked around like zombies. Nobody could work, could do anything productive. It was just a vicious circle of doom scrolling, crying, getting angry, and still holding hopes that we can make a difference, that we can stop it somehow. And it was before we heard about the horrors of Bucha, Mariupol, Kramatorsk, Irpin, and the crimes of our soldiers. So we wrote letters and signed petitions and protested and put up posters and stickers and then cried some more. But even though I feel like everyone around me is against the war, it feels like the rest of Russia has gone silent. Where are the protests that I expected? I genuinely thought that there would be so many people on the streets that the regime won't be able to take it. But well, there were a lot of things that I didn't expect, and even more things that I didn't understand. What I definitely did not expect was just how easy it was for the government to silence us. I thought we had a voice. I thought our voice mattered, if only a little. What I failed to see before was all these years of protests, our right to have an opinion about our government's actions. A right I thought we had was just a toy we were allowed to have. Protesting for our values against the things that we consider to be wrong and horrible is apparently a privilege. I forgot that when you live in a fake democracy, you only have an illusion of rights, and when those in power are done playing pretend, they can take each and every one of your rights away within days, because that's what happened. It took them less than a week to just forbid people from speaking up against the war. We are not allowed to call to war, an attack, an invasion, because that would discredit the Russian military forces, so the right expression to use is special operation. We are now threatened with up to 15 years in prison for spreading fake news about the conflict. These are laws that were passed, laws that I'm breaking, by the way. And there are hundreds of people in prison for social media posts and comments and likes. All independent media blocked. Instagram and Facebook blocked. We now need a VPN just to access the news. It happened like this. I realized that I don't actually have any rights. I can't express my own opinion about what's going on. I'm not allowed to do anything. So protesting also became a crime. And it's not like before the war, we had it all easy and could protest all we wanted. We are all used to police violence and made up charges. Protesting has always been risky, and people who regularly participate in rallies are well aware of those risks. You protest, you spend a night in a prison cell, you pay a fine, and then you protest again. I mean, a riot oneself is an actual thing, but with those new laws passed, the rules of the game have changed. They don't have to make up charges. They have every right to detain you, take you to court, and prove that you are guilty. So protest has become a lot more dangerous, because now it's not just a risk of being detained. You know that you will be detained unless you are very lucky. And if you are arrested, first of all, the police can do anything they want to you with no consequences. And if you are lucky not to be tortured, you will still be tried in court. And the punishment for such offense, it kind of gets worse as time goes on. At first it was mostly huge fines and administrative jail sentences for up to 15 days, which is what the majority of protesters went through, including some of my friends. That was back in spring and summer of 2022, and I was just extremely lucky that I wasn't arrested. But that was then. When September came, it became even worse. Nationwide mobilization started. And since December, more and more people are being sent to jail for fake news and army discreditation. Why would they need this unprecedented level of repressions if 88% of Russians supported Putin and the war? So it just gets worse and worse. I never imagined anything like this happening. But the point is, from the very beginning, all forms of visible protest, the kind where people can actually see you, and especially all concentrations methods of protest, where you gather a lot of people together, all of them became very dangerous, and for an ordinary person, the cost of participation in them is very high. But that's not the only thing. What I didn't realize before was that huge protests, the kind that make the news, actually have to be organized by someone. We all kind of think that protests are the expression of the will of the people, but in reality, hundreds of thousands of people don't just gather spontaneously in one place on their own. And most of the anti-war protests that we had so far were almost spontaneous, without a date and a time and a place and a campaign to accompany the protest. We have hundreds of opposition social media pages and channels. And in those first weeks of war, all of them encouraged us not to be silent, to go out on the streets and protest. And people did. We don't know how many people actually participated in the protests back then, but we know that around 20,000 people were detained. It kind of seems like that's not much. People on the internet say, well, if you all go out on the streets, then you will be able to outnumber the police, and they won't be able to arrest everyone, right? That's right, but again, people can't become a force to be reckoned with spontaneously. They need to be coordinated in an organized campaign. And we don't actually have an organized resistance movement. We have opposition politicians, anti-war Telegram accounts and Instagram pages, and they are all separate from each other, atomized. In fact, our biggest opposition group, the Anti-Corruption Foundation or the Navalny team, has always had a reputation of getting into fights with the rest of the opposition. However, that didn't stop them from organizing the biggest protest actions we have seen in recent years, all on their own. But not after the war started. One of the reasons for that was that the organization was essentially destroyed just a year before, when Alexei Navalny was arrested and all the other members had to go into hiding abroad, which made its operation a lot more difficult. However, since the beginning of the war, several new opposition groups emerged. And even though those groups don't have quite the following that the Navalny team does, they've been very active and quite creative, organizing a number of decentralized protest actions all across Russia. And unlike Navalny team, they are actually trying to cooperate with each other, which I think is a great trend. But decentralized guerrilla protest doesn't actually get as much attention as your regular street rally would, because it's just harder to observe. Military enlistment offices in various towns of Russia are being set on fire by unknown individuals. Train cargo meant for the battlefield doesn't reach its destination because the railways are sabotaged. Anti-war slogans appear everywhere, on city buildings, in public restrooms, in elevators, even in supermarkets instead of price tags. Women in black with white flowers stand on the streets. Thousands of instances of small, almost personal activism, so small it's almost invisible, done by ordinary people who are not coordinated by anyone directly. It's safer than rallies, but not completely safe. But this form of protest gets a lot of criticism, both from Russia and from abroad, from people who think that it's ineffective. After all, it doesn't make the news, which is why sometimes it feels like nothing is happening. But you guys are protesting wrong. Hurry up and break the regime, what's taking so long? People are dying. And maybe they're right. Maybe our protest doesn't actually have an impact. Maybe it's all for nothing. Maybe we do it for our own self-satisfaction, so that for a couple of minutes we can stop feeling broken and devastated. Maybe it is entirely our fault that the government is still functioning. Maybe we're just not trying hard enough. But you know what? If the power that we as people have was so easy to access, if all the people in the world could just rebel against the death and violence and injustice and oppression when they feel like it, there would be no dysfunctional governments, no injustice or inequality, and no wars in the world. Because, people just wouldn't let any of that happen. But that's not how it works. Just protesting is not enough. We need a strategy if we want to bring about change. Because no matter how many people we have on our side, bad strategy equals failure. There have been cases in history when millions of people peacefully protested with no result. Erika Chenoweth and Maria J. Stefan analyze more than 300 resistance campaigns to understand why some of them fail and others succeed. According to them, there are several things that are essential. The first is loyalty shifts. We need to get members of the regime on our side if we want to separate the regime from its main sources of social, economic, political, and military power. To do that, we need a diverse body of protest, people from different social backgrounds all fighting together. Because the more diverse the protest body is, the higher the chance that participants have meaningful links to the members of the regime, which means a higher chance of converting them. Obviously, that means peaceful protest, because a lot less people are willing to participate in a violent protest. But besides all that, we need united opposition and united strategy. And right now, we don't have any of that. All of our opposition is either in prison or abroad, and it's nowhere near united. Although in the recent months, some of them started making some steps towards consolidating in an organized campaign. Anonymous sources say that the majority of people in the government structure and the elites are quite unhappy with what's going on, but we don't know whether this unhappiness will actually transform into loyalty shifts, considering that our major opposition branch calls everyone who has anything to do with the government crooks and thieves. And because we have lost the momentum, we no longer have a diverse body of protest. Almost every person that I protested with back in 2022 has left the country. And we have so many political prisoners sentenced to years and years in prison over nothing that it's no surprise that people are even more afraid than before. We can't trust those skewed opinion polls to gauge how many people actually support the war, but we can trust them to show the very general demographics of the pro-war and the anti-war groups. And they show that the bulk of anti-war protesters are well-educated people in their 20s and 30s, and that the older the person is, the more likely they are to agree with whatever Putin does. Research data from the Russian field shows that the so-called war supporters, when asked, "Would you agree if the president decided to stop the special operation? And would you agree if he decided to continue with it?" are very likely to answer yes to both questions, because they trust him to be right. It's almost like they don't trust themselves to have an opinion about the war. Apparently, many people in Russia don't actually understand what's going on, which is not a scenario I seriously considered before. I thought something in the lines of, in the modern age, everyone knows about anything that's happening in the matter of minutes, so people always know what's going on. Well, that's not really the case. Propaganda has always been an essential part of Russian media space. In fact, almost all media in Russia are controlled by the government, even though on paper, in our constitution, all media are supposed to be free. And some of you might imagine propaganda as this crude repetition of political slogans, like war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength, that Orwell kind of thing. But that's not how it works. In fact, modern-day propaganda is very good at imitating free speech. Our TV shows are staged spectacles that look like debates. They broadcast heated arguments between the TV hosts and the guests. After watching these, viewers miraculously come to the conclusion that we are defending Ukraine against the Nazis and defending ourselves against the West. And the viewers think that they came to believe that on their own, that nobody forced that opinion on them. And of course, the government hasn't forgotten about the internet. They control YouTube channels, social media pages with millions of subscribers, news websites that generate insane amount of views. And now they're making sure that propaganda is the only thing you will ever encounter if you are physically located in Russia. They block sites with unwanted information, and they imprison people with unwanted opinions. So if you live in Russia, chances are you're not really exposed to diverse points of view, because the government is striving to have total control. But as of today, that control is not yet absolute, because no matter how hard they try, the government can't control everything that is said on the internet. So the internet can be used as an alternative source of information, to get that much needed exposure to diverse points of view, to try to understand what the hell is going on. But when the internet is used by people who don't know how to fact-check things and filter out disinformation, it becomes dangerous. It's no surprise that typical war supporters are older people who don't really know how to avoid propaganda on the internet, or worse, watch only TV. And the internet in the hands of a state is a disaster. It's bad enough that social media algorithms play into our confirmation bias. Because social networks are designed to make us hooked on content, they prioritize content that we are more likely to engage with. So they show us what we want to see and recommend us opinions that we already agree with. And we end up even more attached to the information that we discover on the internet, because we think that we found that information ourselves, and we like to think that we're smart. So if by some chance we happen to be wrong about something from the beginning, social networks are designed to confirm our biases instead of challenging them. And if someone's view of the world is already distorted by propaganda, it's only going to get enforced. So when controlled by the state, social media networks turn into full-blown propaganda machines. Because if you control the fabric of the internet, you can almost control reality, or at least control how reality is perceived by people. After all, the internet is a world of its own. But it's a lot harder to fake material reality than to fake people's opinions on the internet. You can even make it look like everyone supports the war. So the infamous government-controlled troll farms work full-time, their employees integrating pro-government political ideas into seemingly irrelevant posts about astrology or sports. Kremlin bots write comments, lots and lots of comments, to make it look like people support the war. Complicated algorithms are used to persecute people who make anti-war posts or even share or like such posts. All that on top of social media algorithms showing people what they want to see creates a really distorted picture of Russia. A Russia where everyone believes what the government says because it's common sense. Where everyone believes in a fantasy where Russia is the lone hero defending itself and Ukraine against the West. A world where Russian soldiers are saving people from Western hegemony and fighting against colonialism. A world where Russian missiles are not destroying power plants and not leaving people without heating or electricity. A world where Russian soldiers don't pillage villages and don't kill civilians because just the idea of it is impossible and makes no sense. A world where Russia still has dignity and honor, the narrative we were raised to believe. They want us to think that that's what everyone believes. They are molding the Russian internet into a bubble where this fantasy is the general consensus. The result of that? Some people do choose to believe what they think everyone believes. I mean, if everyone says that our soldiers don't kill civilians, it must be true, right? We can't adequately judge how big that fantasy bubble actually is. Because they want the people who are against the war to feel like they are the minority, to feel helpless and alone. They want us to give up the idea that we can fight it. You can't change the system because the people are not ready. They don't want to change, they want to be left alone. This is what propaganda wants us to believe. That's also the kind of rhetoric that skeptics are so eager to accept, because skepticism and nihilism require no action and no sacrifices. Give up. We're all trapped in our little prisons of glass and concrete, too small and insignificant to have the power to change anything. All of us hallucinating of our small personal universes, generated by social network algorithms. How can we be sure that we understand what's going on? War is bad, but we can't be sure we understand the reasoning of the people who started it. They must have had a reason, right? Is it even possible for us to learn the truth? What about the evidence? You say, well, it's pixels, it's all just pixels. How do we know what's real? Anything can be made up. What if there's no such thing as truth? Oh, that would be so convenient for people trying to hide their crimes. Objectivity is a myth that is proposed and imposed on us, said Dmitry Kiselov, the head of Russia Today, a state media agency that was established with the idea of showing the world the Russian point of view. You see, propaganda doesn't just fool people with lies, but rather declares that there is no such thing as objective truth. It declares that everything is someone's point of view, and so-called facts don't have any value. It says you shouldn't trust people who claim to be impartial, because they also have an agenda, only it's hidden, and any evidence that they try to use to support their point of view can be made up. It's impossible to act in the best interests of everyone. By discrediting those who claim to be objective and impartial, propaganda creates this cynical worldview where everyone is to be suspected. The whole world becomes a conspiracy. And conspiracy essentially means that the world around us is moved and controlled by unknown forces, and that we are just small people unable to change anything. They say, forget about truth, we'll never find it. But if there is no such thing as truth, then everyone can do anything they want and present it in any way they like. When the only way of access most of us have to war is through screens, we become detached from it. It becomes another piece of content, along with memes and cat videos. Just another series of posts, another collection of texts or images that shouldn't be taken at face value because they are on the internet, and anything on the internet can be made up. But there is material reality behind those images of war. Sure, you can fabricate a couple of images, but you surely can't fabricate terabytes of data. But the internet is confusing. There is so much contradictory information there that it feels like we are drowning and will never reach land. Facts, anecdotes, and lies, interpreted and spun in every possible way to appeal to every possible audience and to please every possible power player. And we have to figure it all out, what to trust and what to ignore. Or we can just give up and say that we don't care about the truth because we'll never reach it, so we shouldn't even try. I said that the government's control over the internet is not absolute, but really doesn't have to be. The government doesn't actually need to control everything that is said on the internet. They don't need to hide the truth, as in they don't always need to erase it. They just need to drown the truth in a pool of noise. And they do it by putting out multiple interpretations of the same events, by popularizing conspiracy theories and fabricating contradicting evidence, so that everyone who tries to understand what the hell happened stays confused. Who were the victims in Bucha? Were they actors or mannequins? Or dressed-up soldiers? Were the missiles that hit the Kramatorsk railway station meant for the battlefields? Or was it a provocation by the Ukrainian army? Different pro-Russian media posed different interpretations of the same events, then edit them out to match new evidence, making things more and more confusing for their audience. But propaganda is not trying to sound convincing or to fill up holes in its argument anyways. Confusion is the new form of censorship. They want their viewers to think that they are too stupid to understand anything, that the situation is too complicated because there are so many powers at play. They generate challenging points of view that don't actually present any challenge, to make people give up trying to figure out what's going on. And this new form of censorship by noise, by confusion, by informational abundance instead of scarcity is effective because people are giving up on their ability to figure things out. If you think that you are too stupid to understand what's going on, if you think that you will never get your hands on some of the pieces of the puzzle, if you think that the information you're dealing with is as credible as grains of sand that slip away the moment you try to take a closer look, you're bound to give up. Give up and settle for whatever version of the events that make you feel calm and content. You can almost tailor your reality to your own happiness. You can mold the world into a place that makes sense to you. Granted, the internet and social media algorithms can make any dream reality possible by helpfully providing all the arguments and evidence, real or fake, to support it. And propaganda offers a very comforting narrative because it says that everything is okay. The world is not on fire. And it's the only narrative that allows us to keep our identity, that aligns with the image of Russia that we used to have in our heads. Because I have to tell you, my sense of identity is being crushed. Everything I used to believe about my country, my culture, the people around me, no longer applies. Everything is upside down. What was the country that I lived in? How did it turn into this? What are we supposed to do now? How do we fix things? Are we supposed to mourn the peaceful country that we lost? Did it even exist in the first place, or was it just a mirage? An image created by propaganda, a collective hallucination? To me, it feels like the Russia I knew is gone, or at least my idea of it no longer exists. We used to have, a life. We would make fun of Putin and how things never change. We'd have heated conversation about what we can do to change things. We'd compromise. We'd protest. We'd have hopes that changes are coming, because it was becoming clear that people around us won't change. They're not content with the way things are. And to me, at least, it seemed like we had something going on. I was sure that we had a future. Like I said in the beginning, I was sure that that bubble of discontent was about to burst. And I hoped that it would bring change, positive change. That life, those hopes, are not coming back. They were taken from us, transformed into something unthinkable. Our country started a war, a tragedy that has taken so many lives, and it will continue to take lives until it's stopped. And in Russia, people are being arrested for wanting peace. People keep leaving and leaving the country. More than half of the people I know have already left, myself included. We left, our identities crushed, and our country gone. And on top of that, we all hate each other. We hate ourselves for not being able to stop the war. We hate people confused by propaganda. If the discussions online are to be trusted at all, a very popular idea amongst the people who are anti-war is that Russians have this slave mentality that prevents them from seeking the truth or rising against the oppressors. We believe that there is no saving us. We have lost all hope, and all we have left is self-loathing. And this self-loathing narrative is partly grounded in the same reasoning that I had before the war, that it should be easy to stop. People can just go out and protest. They can just find the truth on the internet. And if this war is still going on, means that probably people don't want to stop it enough, right? So we deserve to be hated. But that's not true. We want to stop it, and we are doing everything we can to stop it. There are so many people in prisons who spoke up against the war knowing that they are going to be arrested, and they did it anyways, because they believed it to be right. The thing is, self-loathing is not productive, and it's not going to help us stop the war. Hating each other will get us nowhere. We can't be united by hate, guilt, and despair. We have to get as many people as we can on our side. This regime won't fall from the sheer power of our self-righteousness. But this regime is still standing not because we're not trying to break it, or because we're not doing it enough. Our opponent has power and resources, and we are all scattered around the world hating each other for not having won. yet. But we have a lot of problems to solve and questions to answer. How do we stop the war? How do we disrupt the regime safely? Can we protest and not get imprisoned somehow? How do we get more people on our side? And how can we do anything for Russia when we are all abroad? Questions, but no answers. We have another so-called election coming up in March. An election where we'd have to choose between Putin and Putin's supporters, obviously. It seems like our opposition has been trying to come up with some sort of protest strategy for the election. They say that Russia has all the factors that could shape a revolutionary situation. It just needs a spark to ignite the flames. I really want to believe that. I know that to our parents it seemed like the Soviet Union would exist forever, just like the name of the book by Alexei Yurchak who studied it. Everything was forever until it was no more. I want to believe that it will all come crashing down just suddenly, even though now it seems like it will never end. How am I supposed to finish this video? Should I be optimistic? We'll get through this. Everything will be fine. But everything is uncertain. I feel swept away by the course of history. First COVID, now this. Everything is moving, everything is changing, and I don't know where I'll end up. Where will I be in a year? At least physically. And I feel pretty scared to publish this video. I am breaking a law publicly. But one of the many things that I learned last year was that terrifying things are actually not that terrifying once you do them. And that you should sometimes do even the things that you think are insignificant. Because you never know, maybe this will make a difference. The first thing that I asked myself when I realized that my country started a war was, could I have prevented this from happening? What if there was something I could have done? And a lot of people ask themselves that question. And they sometimes answer, like, yes, if I went to one more protest, two more protests, if more people went with me, maybe we would have enough people to make a difference. Maybe together we could have changed something. But that's not really how it works. You can only be responsible for your own actions. You can't be responsible for the actions of other people. So, no matter how I think about it, my answer is no. There was nothing I could have done alone, unless I'd have found a way to change the minds of many, many people. And this, in a way, is what I'm trying to do now. Thank you for listening.